So we'll get started. Like I said, it'll be informal. So spoiler alert, I did not finish the Barkley Marathons. Here's lads with me at the gate right after I finished my second lap. The weather was fantastic, and therefore we had the best results probably ever of the Barkley Marathon. So it was really a great opportunity to have a front row seat to it, a great experience just being able to have the privilege to go there. And so it was the first time ever they had 5 people go out on a fifth loop, and I see that it was a combination of factors. Number one, the weather was near perfect. Also Lazarus Lake, who picks the field, and he, I think, really wanted to have a finisher because no one had started a fifth lap since 2017, just to give you an idea. He always rings a bell lap, like in track. I saw him bolting to his U-Haul. He almost forgot to grab the bell and do the bell lap because he hadn't touched it in 6 years. So that was kind of fun to see him going to get it. So a great opportunity to do this. So I'm going to share. So if any of you don't know who I am, Andrea Larson. I grew up in Marathon, just 15 miles west of Wausau. So I've lived here my whole life. Did almost all my training here. I'm a mother of 3 children, and it's really exciting to see my kids taking this interest now as well. They're ages 8, 6, and 5. I started doing ultras in 2009 or 2008. So I've been doing ultras for a fair amount of years. I did take an 8-year break having children, but in that time, I wouldn't have been here without Tim and Anna inviting me onto their team, Rib Mountain Racing, to start doing adventure racing, which had a lot of similarities to the Barkley Marathons with respect of going off trail, the map and compass concept. And I would have never been here without a lot of people, but namely them inviting me into the adventure racing community, which was great preparation for this. As probably all of you know, I'm also the executive director of Iron Bowl. Also, I am on the board for Wausau Nordic Ski Club, where I spearhead the Snowstriders program, which is the youth ski program as well. So normally I'm cross-country skiing a lot in the winter time. Yep, no problem. And so that was a big sacrifice this year. This was by far the most running that I've ever done in the winter, and didn't do as much skiing. And first year, fat bike trails were open at 9 Mile, and I think I went there 2 or 3 times before the Barkley was over, but then I got some good fat biking after the Barkley as well. And I think I skied and fat biked more in mid-March through April than I did the whole rest of the winter. So had to do that sacrifice, but it was worth it. Also, you know, a lot of this is, I am very privileged, not only for the opportunity, but to have the time flexibility to do all this training, and also the God-given talents that I've been blessed with. So I have to give thanks to God for being able to do these things. So who here has watched one of the 2 infamous movies? Okay, so almost everybody here is very familiar with the concept of the Barkley Marathons, but I will give a little bit of background. And if I forget a critical piece of the quirkiness or the folklore, let me know, and I'll confirm some of that information too. So there's 2 famous movies. One, it came out in about 2017-ish, called The Barkley Marathons, The Race That Eats Its Young, and that's how a lot of people found out about the Barkley Marathons. And another one came out a couple years ago following Gary Robbins, who is very famous of being the only person that started a 5th lap and has yet to finish up until this year, because there was a couple people that started a 5th lap but didn't finish. Well, just one more. And so he finished. There was a little bit of nuances, but he finished. He got all his books, finished a few seconds over. It was also would have been disqualified for not following the route, but finished, touched the gate 6 seconds after the cutoff. So it was a very dramatic finish to a 60-hour race. So those are the 2 famous. So there are my legs after the Barkley Fall Classic. Any adventure racer would say it doesn't look that bad because
you're not bleeding yet.
Yes. So in adventure racing was great practice and preparations for Barkley Marathons with that off trail, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. But getting to the start line is not something that you just go on a whim and sign up on Ultra, sign up and show up the next week for this. So not only the preparations I'll talk about, but usually people take several years to get there. One of the finishers this year, the Frenchman, I think he started his journey about 8 years ago, and this was the first year that he was in it. Obviously, he was trying to build up his resume and not only his resume to get in, but his qualifications so he could do what he wanted to do at the event. But it is generally a multi-year process, and for me as well, it was a little bit because of my lack of knowledge in that one of the most straightforward ways to get into the Barkley Marathons, there's a secret application process. However, when I was looking into it, I came across the Barkley Fall Classic, where it says the woman and man who win get a guaranteed slot. Guaranteed slot does not mean automatic entry. Minor detail, and they do not handhold you to tell you what the application process is to get that guaranteed slot. So I kind of fumbled and unfortunately found out a little bit too late that I would not be able to compete in 2022, which I was very disappointed, thinking it's been a huge drought. He designs the race with a 1% finisher rate. I missed my chance to be here when history is being made, when someone actually finishes. Well, God has bigger plans and not my plans, but this was the year to be there in 2023. In 2022, the weather was absolutely terrible through the night. And once again, no one got through a fourth loop. And so this was the year to be there. And so it works out. The odds were stacked very much against me going in. And I knew that prior to this year, only one woman had even started a fourth loop. Some people might know that Lazarus Lake has said, who's the race director and founder, said that finishing the Barkley Marathons is not possible by a woman. And he does that, some people conjecture why he says that. What he says is he was an accountant. The numbers don't lie. Women, if you go across the board for races, generally finish 10% slower than men. And if you look at the finish times in the Barkley Marathons, if any man is 10% over, there was one or two exceptions, and the course changes every year, so the course now is longer than when those course records are made. So if you look at the finishing times this year, we had 58.5 hours, I think just under 50, right around 59 hours, and then the slowest finish ever in the history was 6 minutes under 60 hours, and that is I think he's the current Appalachian Trail record holder. So these people have their credentials, and he's finishing with 6 minutes to spare. There isn't a 10% buffer there. So he has a good reason for that, as well as no woman's done it. So he wants to, I think a lot of people conjecture that he's trying to find the women that do want to do it by saying, okay, is a woman going to try harder when I say something like that? Or it's another filtering process. There's only 40 slots in the event. And I'll talk about that in a minute. So here's me with Laz. You may have saw that on the front of City Pages, but a few of the legends of obviously Lazarus Lake, or his real name's Gary Cantrell, and he is 100% the character that he projects himself to be. If you've ever seen a movie, if you've seen a podcast, listened to a podcast, or anything like that, he is truly who he comes out to be. So he does start the race with smoking a cigarette, and he doesn't just showcase that for the event. He's doing a cigarette every hour or two, because after the race, when you're sitting around the campfire, he comes every hour or two to throw a cigarette in the campfire. So he is actually a smoker, he says, because he's bad at quitting things. But he also has a very good credentials. So he's been contributing to Ultra Running Magazine, kind of the mainstay in the publication in the ultra running world since pretty much its beginning. As well as he puts on, I think, 7 races. One of them's the Strolling Jim, which is one of the older ultras in the country, because he wanted to run an ultra, and the closest ones were about 1,000 miles away in New York City and Miami. He lives in Tennessee, so he started race directing that. Found out he was an awesome race director. He was a decent runner, but found that he really excelled as race directing. So he's also the founder of Big's Backyard, which has exploded over the last couple of years as well. And so one of the things that is one of the Barkley terms is virgin, and that's any first-time racer in the Barkley Marathons. And all virgins, when they arrive there, need to check in and provide their home license plate. And so there Laz is with me with my license plate, which he accidentally hung upside down. If anybody was following the Keith Dunn Twitter, I think Keith says, and he has one thing to do, and it was upside down. A lot of you that watched the movie may remember that the way this race started, it started in 1985 when he and a friend backpacked the loop, because at that point there were really only abandoned trails, and the park rangers were saying, we don't want people out there. But they were able to do it, and the rangers were very happy to see them coming back out in one piece. But what really originated was there was an escape, I think in the 1970s, from the assassin of Martin Luther King Jr., James Earl Ray. He escaped from the prison that we currently, during the race, crawl through the prison tunnel in both the Barkley Fall Classic and the real Barkley Marathons. It's no longer an active prison. It was an active prison for a number of years when it was part of the Barkley Marathon, but they didn't crawl into the prison tunnel in those years. But one year, some guards actually, some racers got off course, and the guards actually held the racers at gunpoint for a bit when they got a little too close to the prison when they got off course. But we didn't have that problem because the active prison's a couple miles down the road, so you don't have to worry about it anymore. And he escaped from prison, and over almost 60 hours, he only made it 5 or 8 miles from the prison, not very far. And Lazarus said to his friends, I could run 100 miles in that amount of time. So that was a little bit of the instigation, and he loved backpacking in that area and said this would be a cool place for a race. And now we know it as this international showing of a lot of the best athletes in the world, but it started out with just a handful of guys doing it, and it took a number of years before anybody finished 60 miles, which is now considered the fun run. And he said we wouldn't even think about 100 until someone could at least get the 60 miles, and I think it was closer to 50 then. And Ed Furtaw, who I got to meet and was just a great character, very enthusiastic guy and willing to help out and just share his story. And he was the first one to finish the 3 loops. And then a guy from England came and finished the first time the 100-mile race. And some people say he just didn't. All the Americans didn't think it could get done, and this guy just came over a little, not realizing how impossible it was. And so the books are hidden, and there's a couple reasons why they're hidden. So one, the wild pigs are out there, and literally there was one book that I was grabbing, and I was like, I wonder if a pig got this, because there's a couple, it looked like kind of a bite mark out of it, and there was a bunch of remnants of some pages on the ground, and a little bit of plastic out of the double Ziploc bags. And sure enough, I was talking to a runner afterwards, and the books take a while to get put out, and so he was running around on the trails, and there's a couple books on the trails, and he happened to notice that the book was about 30 meters from where it was supposed to be, and that's a book that stays about the same place every year, but the course does change every year in some regards. This year it was almost the same, so once again I think Laz wanted to see a finisher, and it made it easy for the people coming back to know what that course was. And you're not allowed a GPS of any sort, so no trackers for safety, no cell phones for backup. So that was one thing I had to get over in my head of whenever I did practice out in the woods, I just get frustrated and pull up my phone and see where I was, and you wouldn't have any of that in the race. So that was one thing that I probably could have done a little bit better preparation and having more time without my phone and just relying on myself. As I mentioned earlier, it's 5 loops. I was able to finish one officially. The second one I was slightly over time, and therefore Laz, I said, do you want to count my book pages? And I think he said, it's all the same anyhow. So he did not count my second batch, but the first time he counted, he miscounted, and I'm thinking, you're an accountant. But then I went and started counting them, and I think one was tucked into the other one. I read in race reports, some people crumple theirs up, and they say don't crumple them up, otherwise it takes them forever to count them. So I had them all quartered up, as you can tell, and I think they were kind of nested in each other. So the first time I counted them, I was one short, and I was like, oh no, I'm pretty certain I got to everything. And I'm looking around on the ground, and then I recounted one more time, and they must have been just tucked in each other. So I mentioned the 4D runner capacity. So really a lot of this is in a state natural area. So there's a lot of vegetation that they want to protect, and for good measure. And so this race what Laz does is he tries to kind of figure out how many laps the field will take as a whole. And so he gives, there's some very elite people there, but he also wants to give a opportunity for those people that are persistent in the application process to have the experience as well. And he's stated before that by allowing some people into the wilderness, and especially with this high-profile event, that people see the value of preserving the wilderness. Whereas if no one got the chance ever to step foot into it, this has traditionally been an area for strip mining, and so there has been a lot of mining that's taken place, and there probably is quite a bit of reserves still there that now people will lobby and advocate for preserving this natural area. And so there also, this race in its 38 years has had 100% self-extraction, which means they never had to go in and rescue someone. Now, there's been some interesting stories of people getting back to camp, such as last year, the guy that was able to finish this year, last year he got so disoriented that he wandered into a local town, and someone called to report there was an Indian woman. This guy's about 6'4", running around in the middle of the night, and he was hallucinating. And this year, actually, when he finished too, that was one of the first things he said. He said the voices were so bad because the race course now is so difficult that you have very, very, very little time to sleep. And so that's one of the things that make this race extremely hard for the people getting into that fifth lap. So you saw the book pages, but ultimately this race, you have to be prepared in multiple dimensions. You cannot be just a fast runner. You cannot be just a great adventure racer or navigator. You have to be fast enough. And you also have to do your preparations with knowing the course, preparing with the correct gear. 2 years ago when we had bad weather out on course, there was a lot of people that just didn't have waterproof enough and warm enough gear. So something that's special about this race is in the location. Frozen Head State Park is a beautiful park. So I would recommend anybody here that, or if you know of anybody that has interest in participating in the event, to first go to the park, run some of the trails, and or do the Barkley Fall Classic, and that will filter out a lot of people's interest. They will fill up that cup and have it overflow. And if also another way, if maybe travel is prohibitive, is to try some adventure races or road games or orienteering events, because there's a lot of similarities with that off trail aspect and going and reading a map and compass and being self-sufficient. Some things that get people worried about from a runner side is you go off trail, you have no crew, you have no pacer, you have no tracker, you can't call anybody. Those are all pretty common in adventure racing and or orienteering and road gaining. One thing about adventure race side, it's you're usually with a team, but there are solo options there too. So a lot of those things, if you're familiar with that aspect, are less intimidating. But I think it started out, a lot of people are coming from the trail running side. Lazarus Lake has said a lot of people that are successful are actually thru hikers, because they have to be very self-sufficient, they have to problem solve. So now going back to gear, so something very special about Frozen Head State Park is just where it sits geologically. It has its own microclimate, so it's kind of the start of the Appalachian Mountains. So they get a lot of weather that's very different from a few miles away in the city of Wartburg. The peaks aren't crazy high, so the highest peak is just over 3,000 feet, but basically the course is you're going from 1,000 feet to 3,000 feet again and again and again. That's the course. You end up going about 70,000 feet of elevation gain in the exactly 100 miles that never changes when the course changes. He actually says it's 20.00 miles. So in reality, it's probably about 130 miles, just to give you a better sense of the distance. But one piece of gear you do not have to worry about getting ahead of the race is watches, because he, a couple of years ago, back in, I think, 2016, started providing the racers the watches because of technological advances with GPS. Now people are no longer able to bring even their own watch. And so this year, he bought 40 random different watches from Walmart and was putting out posts and informing us that there's one that's I think he called it a digital watch, or no, it was not a smartwatch, but it was one that the screen would go black, and he basically said, you can trade watches, but if you end up with that one, you're in sore luck because it's basically going to be useless. And I actually talked to the person that got it, and she said it was absolutely useless. So he's like, you don't want to be one of the 40, and it was still there when I had to grab mine, but luckily I was good. I ended up using a lot of gear that I had to get just for this race. So I'd never used trekking poles ever. I was a cross-country skier, but I was not quick to embrace trekking poles. Eventually now I have seen a lot of value. So this year I probably fell the least I've ever fell during winter running because it's another point of contact. And I was told by the one person that didn't use trekking poles last year, he was the only one in the field that didn't use it, and he was going to use trekking poles this year. So I started a year out starting to use trekking poles to get used to them. Lights, it's a little different when you're going for a trail run and you just need to see a couple feet ahead of you versus when you're off trail and you need to spot stuff. Also, looking at battery life, because you have to be self-sufficient for that whole loop, which is going to take somewhere between about 10 and 16-ish hours. So you have to consider things a little bit different than in a 100-mile race. Yeah, you might be out there all night, but you're going 2 hours between aid stations, and you can always get another battery. Lighting has really incredible now, though. You can get some pretty awesome lighting for not that expensive and pretty lightweight, too. Hydration, so this was one conundrum I couldn't figure out was, am I going to carry a bladder with all my liquid? Am I going to filter water on course? There are 2 water drops, which may or may not be frozen. They didn't freeze all the way. I was correcting Keith Dunn, who does the Twitter updates. I said, you're giving the world misinformation. The water jugs weren't all completely frozen, just the ones on the outside, because they basically fill up a table like this full of 1-gallon jugs, and the ones in the middle were still not frozen in the middle of the night. It got down to about 10 degrees for us in the middle of the night, and the ground was quite froze. So had to figure out hydration, and I ended up deciding to filter water, which was good because I drank a lot more water than expected, probably because I overdressed a little bit, but the water was fine. One of the guys I raced with, he didn't bother filtering, he just slurped it up. John Kelly one year, his mentality was, well, I won't get giardia until the race is over. He said that's probably not the best mentality to have. I did forget, I mentioned the microclimate. Fog is very common there. So one interesting thing about this race is it takes place over about 60 hours, and during that period, almost every year, there's rain and or fog. And you might have some, like last year started, the first 12 hours were gorgeous weather, but then it started raining at dusk, and it rained the entire night and was dropped down to about 35 degrees. And there's some years that people say it's so foggy you can't even see your toes. So think about trying to navigate. So you really have to rely on your compass, which is obviously another piece of gear. I was surprised at how many people use thumb compasses out there. I use the wrist compass, which for people that navigate was adequate because you're following big features. You don't need to know you're exactly going 108 degrees bearing. It's about 110-ish, 115-ish, good enough. Make sure the feature you're going, northwest instead of southeast, because people have made some pretty big mistakes with just not checking a compass. Pack, got to be able to carry the gear for that far, so I had to get a little bit bigger pack than I had previously gotten. Waterproof socks were a last minute thing when I did a workout when it was about 35 and rained for a couple hours one day. So those days I was like, I don't really want to work out, but this is a good opportunity for me to test my gear. And found that even with my Gore-Tex shoes, after about 2 hours, my feet got completely soaked and then they were numb. And how are you going to warm them up at that point? And then the foot warmers or hand warmers just turn to a goop if they get wet, so those aren't going to be useful either. So that was very useful because you have several water crossings during the race. So even though it didn't rain during the race, we had to cross a couple creeks. And one of them I don't think is possible to get across without getting wet. The other ones you could kind of rock hop, or one spot there was a log across. It was very convenient if you knew about it. I didn't know about it, but I found it, and the group of 4 that I went the second loop didn't know about it, and I said, let's go this way. Gore-Tex shoes I mentioned earlier. I guess I didn't use them during the race, but I used ones with super high treads that I wouldn't have gotten otherwise. Gaiters were nice to have to keep debris out of the shoes, and then my Adventure Race trekking top and pants I used, which I also used on my Everesting attempt because I'd done all my training in those clothes, and that, even though I didn't really look like a runner, that's what I was comfortable in. So this is a picture out at Frozen Head in April of 2022. I started going to Frozen Head. I made the race was my 6th trip to Frozen Head in a year and a half. I did 4 trips in 2022 between April and December. So this was a year long of pretty hard preparations in many aspects. It's really fun to run there, so I would encourage you just to go and visit. They have about, I think, 60 miles of trails, and it's pretty slow going on the trails just because it's so much up and down, but the trails are well maintained. Just a very beautiful area, a lot of waterfalls, so great place to go. And in the summer, it's very, very green because it's kind of humid there. And so physically, in the 3 months leading up, so this would have been mid-November until about Valentine's Day, I did 250,000 feet of elevation gain. Almost all of it was outside. I did get a treadmill at a garage sale the June before, and I told my husband the one thing it needs to do is have incline. Well, it had 11% incline, which I told him it wasn't enough. And we didn't bring it into our house until January because the weather had been really good. So he brings it in the house, and he's like, oh, I didn't check, but I guess the incline doesn't work. And I'm like, kind of the one thing I wanted. So what he ended up doing was he rigged it up and as far as he could without snipping any cords, and it got to 33%. But then the second I got on it, let's just say it's a very carbon neutral treadmill, because if you had it on, it kept going faster and faster and faster. So we had to add a brake, and then we wouldn't have to plug it in. So it had the mobility to go anywhere we wanted in the house with it, because it was so steep. And then a few times I even put it on blocks to go a little bit higher. And at that point, I don't care how fast I'm moving. I just put a pack on and try to get used to that steepness. Because here, so one of the hills had up to a 44% grade over 2/3 of a mile. And it was crazy because it never had any place where it let up. And you're not moving fast at that point. To give it in contrast, Granite Peak, and I actually wrote down the exact numbers. I guess I can look them up later, but in contrast, Granite Peak is about 500 feet in a half mile, which is, it comes out to 17% grade. So just think of 44% versus 17%. And also that hill was a lot longer. The bottoms and tops weren't quite as steep as 44%, but it probably was more than 17% still too. So just to give you the scale, like there's nothing here that I can recreate outside that's anywhere close to some of this stuff. So it did 250,000 feet of ascent, did a ton of training. Like I mentioned earlier, I do typically do some cross training, but I cut down on that drastically because I needed more specific stuff, but I still did try to cross train about once or twice a week to try to not get injured, because that was one piece of advice that Laz gave me, was the number one reason people withdraw from the event is due to injury. This year only, I think 5 people withdrew, which is really low. The last couple of years they've had up to, with COVID it got kind of weird. They got down to I think like number 30 on the wait list, I think. So it got pretty crazy. So navigation, that was the area that I needed to, I think, spend the most time getting comfortable with, because you know, you have to be comfortable being outside in the woods by yourself through the middle of the night and all that. So this is a 100% unmarked course, and a lot of it is off trail. You're not allowed to scout the off trail portions because of it being a state natural area they want to preserve. And it is actually a rule within the state park. You are not allowed to go off trail. And so there's no opportunity for being able to scout those sections. And as I mentioned earlier with the map, that's the map that the park has, and literally you copy a map with a Sharpie that is drawn the course on here. So you have to copy your own map. No one says, here's the course. So if you make a mistake on that, well, that's your problem. So some of the discoveries. So you'll notice a lot of these pictures are more during the summer months. That's because I get a little too cold to be taking my phone in and out of my pocket in the middle of winter. I have renowned, so that was a huge concern for me. I actually brought 5 pairs of gloves and mittens during the race with me at all times, plus arm sleeves, plus 3 sets of hand warmers. Probably a bit overkill, but I didn't have any problems with my hands during the race, which was my biggest concern, because there was times I lose dexterity. I can't even unclip my vest to get anything out of my pack. Can't use zippers, nothing like that. So that top one is from Frozen Head. So I mentioned there's a lot of beautiful waterfalls. So pretty much ran all the trails at Frozen Head, just because I was also preparing for the Barkley Fall Classic, because I had to go back and win it a second time. And you don't know what that course is going to be either. Winter, that next one's up at the Underdown. I don't know what kind of, if there's bobcats up there, Chris, or not, but there weren't any footprints nearby. So Levis Mounds, there was some similar topography there. That's the next one up there. You can see that was in fall. That was in October. That one's also from Levis. I don't remember where that one is, but I spent a lot of time out in the woods. There was times, like I said, I'm blessed with the flexibility of my work schedule to be able to drop or get my kids on the bus, and there was days that I was out in the woods until they got off the bus, and exploring Underdown or going to Rim Mountain, doing long runs up and down the ski hill. So yeah, you just kind of discover a lot of things. That last one was at Rim Mountain State Park on the north side of State Park Road. There's not really any trails on the as you're coming up the mountain, and there was a mouse that played peekaboo with me. It was kind of funny. So I'd go around on one side and then I'd go on the other. I was like, this is crazy. So I got a video of it even. So a lot of discoveries along the way. So a lot of the journey was getting there, and that was really some opportunities. There were some challenges. So there's days that I don't know how well you can see, but there was a lot of flies out on that run. There's a private property I'm able to do hill repeats on, which is really nice because I can sneak in workouts. Here's all my tracks from one workout of where I turn around and do repeats. I don't know how many repeats I did that day, but I probably did like 40 repeats up the hill. And it's just me out there. There's no reason for me to keep going other than just staying self-motivated. There's no one checking in on me, and I'm doing this purely because I want to be there. Rim Mountain got to be kind of challenging once snowmaking started. And it's really hard to get down the hill when it's slippery. There was one day I was out there and I fell, I think I went down 8 times, and it wasn't until the 6th time that I got down without falling. And I think I still fell on one of the other times. And so I was like, is this good for me to be out here, or am I just going to get hurt? So the number one goal with all the workouts was don't get hurt. A lot of briars at times. That was up in the Underdown, Chris. Found some good briars up there, and I'm like, well, this is just going to get me for the race because there's lots of briars in the race. Actually, there weren't that many in the race. And there was a good test day on my gear when it was freezing rain, and got very cold, and realized I need to get waterproof socks that day. So there's me tracing the map there. So mental. So number one thing is it's a solo effort. I actually didn't know anybody that had raced this event until I started preparing. And for this year's event, I only had met one person, and that was, you kind of get a list of names who's in the pool. And I connected with someone and met her, up with her in training at Frozen Head one time. But other than that, I didn't know anybody in the field personally. So I mean, no one's mean out there, but at the same time, everybody's looking out for themselves. So one of the phrases for Barkley is that Barkley waits for no one. And that's true. Everybody has to look out for yourself first. And a lot of the faster people, they're not going to necessarily wait up for anybody. They're not necessarily trying to lose you. It's just they got to go because you don't have time. And I learned that lesson a little bit the hard way. So I mentioned before that you have a long time between aid. I spent a lot of time reading race reports, trying to get a good sense of what the course was. And there's actually quite a bit of information out there. So I was able to have a pretty good handle on what the course was by preparing. And once again, that's a little bit of a filtering process with regards to the people that figure out the application process are probably going to do their homework. There's no required gear lists or anything like that. And so the people that are going to get in are probably the people that are going to do their homework on what gear I need to get there, doing their research to make sure that they're in for everything. Well, it's many things that you can prepare for on race day. There are a lot of things outside your control, and there's going to be a lot of challenges, and that's something that I think the race director is looking for. He's kind of joked. So if you've watched the movie, you know there's bib number 1 assigned. And a lot of those people have very high credentials. It's who he thinks he's going to be get back to the start line first because they quit. And one of the people he picked one year was someone that had a very one-dimensional approach. The way they solve their problems when they're racing is they just go faster. Well, if you're on an unmarked course, anybody here that's done anything like that knows if you just go faster, you just get more lost and get more off track. So, and that person did not do well in the 2 years that he was there. So I've talked a lot about the lead up. I've kind of put some bits and pieces in of the race itself. So one thing that I forgot to finish my thought on earlier, I mentioned that there's books hidden. The other reason that the books are hidden, I mentioned that some sections are on trail. Well, they want to be hidden so the park is still open to the public. They don't want a hiker to take the books. Well, this year one of the books was not completely hidden, and a hiker returned the book before the finish. And there was the guy that actually won was still need to get to the book, and we all knew he was going to get there, and there wasn't going to be a book there. Luckily, he had the mental capacity still with only 20 minutes to sleep in 60 hours, was able to realize he for sure was in the right spot. I think he wrote out a message in the stones to Laz to prove that he was there. And then we knew, or Laz knew where the book was because it was in his possession from the helpful hiker returning it for us. And when he won, you could tell that he was so relieved because he's like, there wasn't a book there. And so Laz showed him that the book he had the book, and he was so relieved. So that's the other reason the books are hidden. So there's Laz taking off his hat for me. He told me I was lucky because it was warm enough now for him to take off his hat when the bugle was being played. So I got the famous taps. There's only one spot on course where people are allowed to spectate, and that is at the fire tower, which is the highest point in the race. And that was actually a really good spot for me. Stevens in the red there, we were 2 virgins, and we just nailed a section of the course together. I think we did 3 books completely by ourselves, 3 or 4 books. And then we kind of met up with some more runners again. And that was a section that was kind of a little bit of a mystery to me, and I'm trying to obtain information on it. And so kind of had a game plan and was very proud of being able to navigate through that without any hand-holding. And I mean, the navigation isn't that hard, but I think a lot of people that aren't used to that make mistakes. And actually, there was a veteran that got ahead of me that we had lost going into that section. I was really upset because I was like, that's where I wanted to follow a veteran. Turns out she made some mistakes and got behind us. Because we navigated it better. So that was a very big boost, because when we got there, they can't tell you anything. So I heard someone whisper when we were watching John Kelly. It was just hushed over when everybody was watching him on his 5th lap, and someone whispered, "It's like watching animals at the zoo," because you couldn't do anything. All you could do was clap, say good job, and watch them. And literally we're watching him fill up his water bottle, him guzzle a protein powder, rinse out his water bottle, fill it up again, and then go on his way. So it was really weird. So yeah, the way things worked out is Steve and I went really good together. Unfortunately, he had done that crazy, was it transcontinental race or something crazy, where you go around New York City for like 2,000 or 3,000 miles on a 1 mile course in downtown New York. And he did that last year, so his feet were still kind of beat up because that took place in October. So he had to drop because he's like, if I go further, I'm just going to trash my feet again. So we really complemented each other well. He had his map out, and he was pretty good, or quite good at following along with the compass. And I was more looking at the bigger features, and we were working really good as a team. So that was really cool to meet him. And he was from Australia. So at one point in the race, it was really bizarre. Halfway through the second loop, I was with a group of 4, and then we ran into 2 other people. So there were 7 of us going together. I was the only American in the group of 7 at that point, which was really cool to think of having that opportunity. So the navigation actually was pretty basic. Tim can attest, I'm not a great navigator. Usually I follow him in the woods. And so this was actually the first time in a race that I was following my own navigation on my own. So that was something I probably could have done a little bit better of putting myself more in those situations, but it was kind of hard to do that over the winter months. I did do a Rogaine about a month before the race, and that was it. Once again, if this is something you think you want to try, doing the Rogaine, and the particular one we did was on somewhat similar terrain, and it was awesome. That had a very similar outdoor wilderness solitude experience as the Barkley Marathons, if that's what you think you want to try. So there is plenty of opportunities, and there are not very many people doing Rogaines and adventure races and orienteering meets that they are genuinely excited when people come in. You don't have to navigate this secret application process and figure out how to get in. So if that's something that's interesting to you, that's a great opportunity to have that experience. As I mentioned earlier, the veterans weren't necessarily helpful because, one, they had to look out for themselves. So there was a couple times I started going the wrong way, and no one called me back to turn me around. I just looked behind me and realized they were gone. And that was how I lost one of the veterans going into the section I mentioned earlier. Was I made a mental error, and I knew I had to go around a cliff, and I got cliffed out. And then I had to backtrack, and the person just kept going, and I lost them for a bit. Also, I noticed some veterans maybe didn't study as much, and they would just kind of go down the hill and be like, you're not following the feature, or you're not following the bearing. So I think they were getting a little bit too into the excitement of the race at times. And, you know, we all make mistakes. I made actually at the very beginning of the race, on the first descent, I kind of had a game plan, but once again, you can't scout off course. And I attacked down the hill a little bit too early. I think I had the right bearing when I look at the map of just kind of where I think I was, but I ended up missing my mark, because that one you don't really have a feature to follow, and you just kind of take a bearing and run down the hill. And the very first descent, I ended up off mark, and I was like, so I kind of lost my confidence right off the bat. So after that, I was around some people, and I kind of stuck with them because I was a little too conservative. Looking back, I should have. There was a point where I was with a group that they were tending to slow down, and I should have took off. But my mentality was, you're going to probably make a mistake on your own, so it's better to stay with the group. Well, it turns out one of the people that broke up ahead of us ended up making a really huge mistake on a section that you only had to do a little bit off trail. And she finished about an hour behind us. And I was like, what did you do? And she's like, I don't know. I'm glad she made it back okay. But yeah, everybody's going to make mistakes out there. And for us, the weather was absolutely perfect. So we had bright blue skies, as you can see from this picture. The night was just absolutely gorgeous. I wish I would have taken it in a little bit more, but I was racing, and I wasn't going to look too much at the starry night. And even for a lot, I mentioned it got down to 10 degrees. So we were going up some of these hillsides. They're quite, they're not rocky. They're regular land. So I can't imagine how muddy they get when it rains. And I was having to do mini switchbacks up some of these hills because they were so steep. And there was times, I was using my poles the whole race, there was times the pitch of the hill was so steep that I was putting my pole in, it wasn't grabbing anything because I was pulling at the same angle as the pitch of the hill. And that was when the ground was still frozen, which is even better than when it's, not frozen, obviously, because nothing was moving under you. And I said, okay, I got that going for me, plus it's not raining, and I'm still struggling getting up these hills. So that was, I can't imagine going up the hills. So that is Ratjaw. So that was during one of my scouting trips. That's an area that in the park that you can go to. That's also part of the Barkley Fall Classic. So I've been up and down that hill a few times. The only time you can go up and down that hill is in the Barkley Fall Classic or during the Barkley Marathon. So it's a power line cut from the prison. You literally go under the prison tunnel during the race, just like like you're a prisoner. And you crawl right up that. Literally, you're crawling in spots. And it goes up 2,000 feet in 1 mile. And it takes you about an hour to get up just because it's so steep. Now, there you can see it's not mowed. In the Barkley Fall Classic, it wasn't mowed, and so we had to thrash through that stuff. So it took us over an hour to go down the hill this year. The course changes every year, and this is the first year the racers had to go down. And you just get so snagged up in it, you can't see your feet, and there's times you just have to kind of back out and try to like thrash yourself out of it. But the prisoners mowed it this year before the race. The prisoners always mow it, and I wonder why they get that job. And so it was actually quite enjoyable to run down, and then going up was fine. It was the middle of the night. So that doesn't do justice. A lot of people say, yeah, I think I could do that, and they get there, and it's a very different story. So 2,000 feet in a mile, so 4 times steeper, or 4 times higher than Rim Mountain, but only double the distance, just to give you that perspective again. So I mentioned my rocky start earlier. I did gain a lot of confidence then navigating with Steven, which was awesome. I was very conservative, and so I'm kind of kicking myself now as I can digest what happened, because I was only a few minutes over the cutoff. I think I was at the top of the last descent, I think, when my watch hit the 26 hours and 40 minutes, which is the cutoff. And that was the first time I had never made a cutoff. And then after that, I jogged a little bit. But it was kind of weird. I was with a guy. And part of the reason I didn't break off from the group was I know the takeoff point for that last turn was going to be a little bit tricky. And I had what's called a backstop. So, like, I know if I went the wrong way, but I didn't want to lose time by going down it incorrectly. Well, he just took off like a madman because he thought I don't know how he thought we'd make the cutoff still. And he just started going on the wrong side of the hill, and I'm like, no, you need to go that way. Then he just cuts over that way, and he finished like 20 minutes behind me because he ended up having to go down the creek bed then, which was really slow. And I was like, that was the first time in the race I used my whistle. I was trying to whistle him back because he just took off, and I'm like, you're going to take a really long time by going that way, but okay. And I was very proud, though, that I took my time. That was the only time I really sat and looked at my map close, and I nailed my last little navigation in. So that was a little bit of a nice way to end the race, even though it wasn't quite the way I wanted to end. At the same time, I knew a third lap would have been just brutal. It was so the first time was in clockwise, and then the second time was counterclockwise, and it changes year to year. The third loop would have been counterclockwise again. And that, in my opinion, is a lot harder. It's a little bit trickier in navigation. And then the worst climb of the race, the one with the 44% grade, is in that direction. It's at the end of the loop, so that would have been really, really hard. A lot of people say the LAS speak, the course descriptions that LAS gives. So you get the highlighted route, but there's you have to find the book. So obviously, if you have a 1 to 24,000 map, finding a book hidden in a tree stump or under some rocks, so basically that's where they usually are, is going to be near impossible unless you have a description. So he gives some descriptions. And also there's a lot of trails in certain areas that are either really old trails or are jeep roads in some of the other nearby properties that aren't named, so he has to kind of describe it. And he actually does a pretty good job describing it, and the books are always exactly where he said they would be if you carefully and recalled all the information he gave about the locations. So that was something I heard conflicting things on. So some of my takeaways is it was a great opportunity, not only to experience it firsthand, but also to be able to see history being made, essentially, and just having that front row seat. I was taking in every second I could of the other racers. It was a huge investment. It was only $1.60 for the race application because that's how much cigarettes used to cost in the day. But there was a big gear investment and also just time investment. I mentioned 4 trips down there in about over an 8-month period. So a big time investment, and then obviously the time training too. So this felt a lot like wedding preparations, where you really don't know what you're doing, and then you're like, if I could do it all over again, I could do it in half the effort. And that's what I feel like, because now I know what the course is. Now obviously there'll be some tweaks, but no one knows what those tweaks are going to be until race day. And I know what gear works and doesn't work, and some of the things that I kind of, should I filter my water, end up, absolutely yes, just filter the water on course. So there's some things that now that I've done it, And, some people have different opinions about stuff too if you ask them questions, or some people are a little bit guarded on what they want to tell people too. So now I know the answers, and I don't have to fumble around trying to read all these race reports and recreate the map and try to figure out what it's going to be like out there. As you can tell, preparations were just essential. And actually, that was one surprise, was by how well prepared I was, and I should have had more confidence out on the course, to be honest. And then, as I mentioned a few times, you want to be comfortable in the woods, comfortable bushwhacking. So if you have that trail running background, you might have the speed, but now you need to translate it to going off trail. And the people that aren't used to going off trail, I remember the first time I started following Tim around in the woods going off trail, I was uncomfortable. And now it's fun to go off trail. And what makes the Barkley so hard? It's everything. And you can't afford these times because he designed it with a 1% finisher rate. So you can't bleed 20 minutes by making a mistake. You can't carry a lot of extra weight and have it slow you down. You can't afford to run out of water and get dehydrated or low on calories. You can't make navigation mistakes. And so it's just all these things put together. Jasmine Paris had an awesome running this year. She was the first woman to finish a fourth lap. It was over time. But she came in not being able to train as much because she was training through a knee injury. So you got to have everything come together, and that's the thing is there's only 40 people there, and everything basically has to go perfect on race day, and then the weather too. So it really empowered me. There I am with my oldest daughter doing her first ever adventure race this spring, which I probably would have never done because I wouldn't have been comfortable enough to lead her around navigating. And now that's kind of opened up another chapter in our lives, having adventures together. And she did the Rid Mountain Adventure Challenge this weekend with 2 other ladies because I was helping Tim out with the race, and she had a fantastic time. So it's just exciting to see her start that next generation of adventure racers, and being able to go with her out in the woods and not feel uncomfortable and getting lost. So any questions on the Barkley? And I can talk a few minutes about Everesting too if you want to hear about that. So yes?
I have a comment and then I have a question.
Okay.
But, I think there's 2 characteristics that you embody that I think a lot of runners or people who would take on a challenge like this, and one is discipline, which I think is part of our character. The other one is motivation, and I think that comes and goes, and you kind of alluded to motivation. So how did you keep up your motivation is my question. The second question is, when things were tough, did you have a mantra in your head that you did over and over?
Yes. So you nailed it with having to be disciplined and motivated. And John Kelly, who is only the third person to finish the race more than once, says you can't be extrinsically motivated because at some point you're not going to care about the extrinsic motivations. You have to want this. And so I'm kind of wired that way, so that helps. And I think a lot of the people are. Laz has made the comment that a lot of people who try to get into this race are very successful in life. And a lot of them, a disproportional amount have higher education of PhDs and such. I do not. So I think a lot of those people are pretty motivated. What was the second part? Oh, mantra.
Yeah.
So one of mine I had started kind of up in February. If you want to be the best, you can't be like everyone else, or something like that. Like you have to go up above and beyond. Yeah, if you want to be the best, you can't be like everybody else. So there's so many runs that I would never see anybody, right? And when I was I did a lot of hill repeats up at Mountain State Park on the Yellow Trail. I would go 8 to 11 hours. I did 4 workouts of just going up and down the Yellow Trail for twice 8 hours and then twice 11 hours in preparation. And I think I saw usually 3 to 5 people, and usually 2 of those people were walking their dogs. And that's all. And there was nothing for me to keep going because my husband rather have me home so he doesn't have to try to balance taking care of the kids while he's trying to work, or just want me home and around the family. And there's so many things, it's not I was actually quite surprised how pleasant the training was. I think because I had that lifting of, I get to have this opportunity that very, very few people get to have. And so there was a lot of times I look forward to actually doing 8 hours of hill repeats. And also, to be honest, I feel sometimes at times invincible when I get home from a workout like that. I might be kind of tired, but to be able to do something like that, and a lot of people don't have that opportunity, those physical attributes to even do that. So that's kind of cool to be able to go out. And there's times I'm like, oh, I got to go for my plan for training is to go another hour on the treadmill tonight. That's going to be awful. But then I just say, it's just, a lot of times too, it was just getting out there. And once you do that first repeat, get out, start out your workout, you can keep going. But it's the willpower to just get out the door. And I think it's no wonder something wrong with the phrase of like the hardest step is like the first one or something like that. Really just to get out there would just be like, okay, just get your gear on, go outside. I don't care how slow I go today, just get out the door. Jason.
What are some of the major differences between the Fall Classic and the Barkley Marathons? And do you have any interest of doing either or both again?
Right, good question. So the Barkley Fall Classic is called the Baby Barkley as well. So it started up about 6 years ago, and I think what that does, to give you a little bit of background, it helps filter out a lot of the people that think they want to do the race, and then they do the Barkley Fall Classic and realize this is not their cup of tea whatsoever. And so they get an opportunity to kind of have a taste of the Barkley. So really, the Barkley Fall Classic is 100% on trails with the exception of a couple power line cuts. One of them being the infamous Rat Jaw, which is still part of the Barkley course. And then another power line cut called Testicle, Spectacle, and Meth Lab no longer is part of, or the last couple of years have not been part of the Barkley course, but it has been in the past. And would I do it again? So the Barkley Fall Classic, it was like a night and day difference doing it in 2021 versus 2022 for me, from personal experience of stepping foot in the park for the very first time, not knowing a single person, and not knowing what I'm in for. And you literally get this bandana that's about this big that has the course, but it's not simple because it starts out in this color and then it goes to this color, and you end up having 4 different colors you have to trace around, and you're just like, and some of the course is marked, but not everything, and you don't know what's going to be marked. And so just having that complete intimidation factor, and then coming back the second year, going with someone I had gone scouting with, having run all the trails at least once, knowing the exact course from the year before, and it actually almost being exactly the same too, and having that confidence of I won last year, because everybody gets to a start line, and admittedly me too, a lot of times I'm like, oh, the gear I'm wearing is my adventure racing top, but the only gear I have that's real running gear is my shoes, which are running shoes. Otherwise, I'm wearing like my ski hat. If you notice in a lot of those, I was wearing my cross-country ski hat, and so a lot of times I look around and I'm like, oh yeah, everybody looks like more of a runner than me. So it was really cool having that confidence then this year at the start line, and knowing that, and seeing the start list too, and being like, I think there's no one that can beat me from the women's side, and I think I have a chance to do better than any woman's ever done here before. But yet, about 5 miles into the course, I'm in about 20th place, and I'm thinking, what's going to happen to all these other people as the day wears on? And then you find yourself, yep, they kind of fall back. So would I do it again? It was a great opportunity doing the Barkley Fall Classic, and I really got to know like the Barkley community, which was really cool. However, there's 3 other races that same weekend that I have interest of doing. Mid-September is kind of a busy time as far as cool races to do. So I'm a little bit torn right now if I'll go back this year. And also, to be honest, now having done the real Barkley, it's kind of not a lot of people, I think, some people, but I don't know if there's a reason for me necessarily to go back and do it when there's other opportunities and other great trail runs out there and stuff. The real Barkley, yeah, it's tough because it took so much preparation. However, there's a little bit of me saying I think I could do better, but the weather was so darn good that the conditions were so fast this year, And I don't really want to be out there in 35 degrees and rain all night either. So it was really nice being able to enjoy the weather out there. So yeah, it is a huge commitment. However, like I said, it's like wedding planning in that now I know kind of what to expect and can probably do it in a lot less effort. So yeah, we'll see. I mean, we'll see what life brings. So the short answer is I don't know.
So it's like jumping out of an airplane twice. You do it once and you go, okay, I made it. And then you have to do it again. And you're like, I'm not really sure I want to do that again. Kind of.
Yeah, a little bit.
But can I ask you, before all of this, were you a cross-country runner, a Nordic skier?
Yes.
So in high school?
Yeah, to go back a little bit further. So I went to marathon. They started cross country when I was in 6th grade or in 7th grade, and all I knew was it was running in the woods, and that appealed to me.
Yep.
And in high school, I was one of 3 girls on the team, and I always enjoyed being out in the woods, and then had the opportunity in college to walk on at Michigan Tech because there's not very many girls up there. I was told the ratio my freshman year was like 6-1. It was really lopsided for the freshman class, so they needed more girls on the team, which now the team, well, even by the time I was a senior, now the team's really good. I would never made it. Even by my senior year, I wouldn't have been able to be on the team, I think, if I would have been 4 years younger. And then they needed more people that skied, and I skied a little bit in high school and had that opportunity. So I had a lot of doors open for me, and I've always enjoyed the multiple different disciplines. So it was really nice to be able to cross-country ski a lot in the winter. So yes, I did all those things and just started doing longer and longer once I graduated from college because I have a hard time individually being able to do hard workouts and fast workouts to the level that the quality that I need in order to get that benefit. So I figured if I had the time to go longer at that point. Now a little bit more difficult with family things, but I was able to weave it in now. Any more questions? Do you want me to talk a little bit about Everesting? It won't be nearly as long, but I don't want to keep people if you don't want to hear about Everesting. Yeah.
Compare your 70-plus laps of Everesting and the physical exertion you did doing that to one lap, your first lap of Barkley Marathons. How would you compare the two in terms of your exertion and how much energy you put out, how you were feeling afterwards?
Yeah, I mean it's a little bit different because one you're at the finish line, and one you know that there's more to the finish line, but not how far yet. So it's metered out a little bit different, but I would say it'd be pretty comparable. Because, yeah, so now, I guess I can go into it. I'll skip one ahead and I'll come back to that one. So it was kind of night and day as far as Barkley versus Everesting. So the seed was planned in 2020 when during COVID, a couple cyclists in the area were doing it. And so that was the first time I ever heard of it. But then as I was doing all this training, I was like, oh, well, I'm planning on doing some 20,000 foot. I did 2 20,000 foot efforts and then 2 15,000 efforts. And I'm like, well, I'm kind of on track to do it. Should I just go try doing the full 29,000? Because it's not that much further. But then I was like, I should probably be focused on the race versus overdo it and then get injured or overtrain. So Barkley and Everesting were complete opposite. So one, I'm like planning months and months, actually like a year for, and that's pretty much not all I think about, but I think about it a lot all the time and all the little things. Whereas Everesting, then I literally decided for sure, I think the day, about 24 hours beforehand, that I was going to do it that day because my schedule was open and I wanted to seize the moment, but the weather wasn't going to be great. It was a high of 46 and it was 22 miles an hour winds that day. But I was like, my husband's going to be traveling all next week, so I won't be able to do it because we have kids. And then we got the Rib Mountain Adventure Challenge race, which we're putting on. I should probably not spend a whole day and a half doing this. And then now it's so hot that it wouldn't have been ideal conditions, so I'm really glad I did it. But I was like, the window is like so near, I better seize the moment. And so I decided pretty much the day before, and I kind of been thinking about it. I got out of bed and within an hour was to the hill, whereas Barkley, I spent built in an extra day of travel to get there and took off an extra, how many extra days. Barkley, you got to carry all your food for 10 to 16 hours. Here I literally put a cooler with everything I could think of and had it in a cooler right there for me, and I could grab it every lap, which took roughly about 15 minutes. So once again, complete opposite, and it was completely rehearsed because I'd done about 200 repeats up this hill throughout the winter, and so I knew exactly like what pace, and it was basically like a metronome. Whereas the Barkley course, I'd never been here before, and I had no idea what to expect. So that was something that was very different and very opposite, but yet the physicality was somewhat similar. And yeah, it was just so simple of just, I follow a marked trail and go back and turn around and do it again. So very different. Any other questions? Yeah.
I think you said you went to the park 4 times. I'm wondering why you did that. Was it to become familiar with terrain or conditions there?
Yep. So part of it also was getting ready for the Barkley Fall Classic as well. And it is a really cool place to visit. So I wanted to be familiar with the place. So the first time was to participate in the Barkley Fall Classic. The next was to cover a bunch more trails in that same time of the year and see kind of what the park looked like, because that was in April of 2022. And usually the race takes place, the date moves, but usually it's around April Fool's, and that's actually when I was there. And I had an opportunity of someone going with me at that same time. The third time, once again, was to get more ready for the Barkley Fall Classic so I could go back and win it. The next time was Barkley Fall Classic, and then that December was very specific training of, okay, I think I know what the course is, so let me look on like the trails, these features. What does this spur look like coming on and off this particular spot on the trail? And that way, during the race, I don't really have to think about it. I know, okay, I'm going to turn and go up this, this is my takeoff point off this trail. Okay. I can talk a few more minutes about Everesting, or do you want to leave?
Sorry about right before the
Yeah.
slide.
Yeah. Yeah, so this was a little infographic we made for, we challenge people on Facebook, if you're on social media, to try to raise a dime for every foot I climbed. And I was incredibly grateful to see all these people that helped support that cause, which probably several of you in this room helped with. Actually, I know some of you in the room have helped with. So it was really incredible to see being able to raise a dime to go back towards Iron Bowl so we can continue to promote outdoor recreation, this great place to live and do outdoor recreation. So yeah, the height of Everest was 29,029 feet, and we raised $2,909, plus got an anonymous donor to match that and double that. So that was incredible. So we did some social media updates. I had a total of 4 people that came out and supported me during it. So once again, it was a little bit of a solo endeavor. And so that was cool to have a few people bop in and out throughout the day. And part of it was the Stairway to Hell. So I went up and down that 71 times. It was a little bit harder with no snow, because I did most of this training during snow. Those were pretty much a race, and all the rocks and roots on the trail, you could just kind of step wherever. And now I actually had to pay attention where I stopped. So actually my splits going down, I think, were not any faster than in the winter, just to be honest. So there's my pace. As I mentioned, I had done repeats. And so that's from Strava. So the gray is the elevation. And then the blue, obviously my pace changed as I went up and down. And I mean, the scale's kind of weird. So, I mean, I'd like to exaggerate, but I don't know how to get Strava to do it. But yeah, you can see it kind of trended downward a little bit, but what I was surprised was it didn't plummet. So I'd done training up to 2/3 that distance, but anybody that's done an ultra endurance event knows that when you hit the 2/3 mark of something that's really long, like 17 hours, and you still have 5 or 6 hours to go, that's kind of where things get really hard. So I was a little nervous about that, but actually that's where like things really started clicking, and just kind of had this second wind and just was able to kind of pound them out. When it got dark, I knew I was going to slow down a little bit, because I think there's actually like something when you, I read an article, when things tend to get dark, you end up going a little bit slower just because of perception.
So what do you eat along the way?
Yes, that's a good question. It's going to depend for each person. So for this particular attempt, because I had my cooler right there, I didn't want to eat garbage the whole time, which I consider as anything processed. I know some people have different definitions. So obviously I need to consume a ton of calories. You can't possibly keep up with nutrition of how much you're burning. but I did do about 2/3 of my calories with tailwind, which is pretty typical what I do. I usually do about half-ish, I think a little bit more. I was also adding protein powder, which is something I hadn't traditionally done, but my husband encouraged me to do that, which I think really helped. And then I had some candy-ish things, but I think I ate like 4 or 5 bananas, but I didn't want to bring more than that because I'm like, that's probably not going to be good for the digestive system to have that many bananas. And so I ate a couple, like candy type items, but then I brought 4 sandwiches, and when things were really clicking about 2/3 of the way through, my stomach felt really good, and what I was eating was like 2 bites of sandwich and then guzzling some protein powder in my tailwind, and my stomach felt great. So I was like, okay, nothing really appeals to me, and I love to eat, but I was to the point where nothing really appealed to me, but I was like, nothing in the cooler really appeals to me. So, okay, this is working. I'm just going to continue, and I'm like, I think I have enough sandwich to last me the whole rest of the time, so I'm just going to keep eating my 2 or 3 bites of sandwich and then guzzling my tailwind. So my cooler was located about 50 meters before my turnaround, so then I could scoop it off my cooler, or if someone was here, they could hand it to me. I could reach the top and then turn around, come back, and then I just ditch it so I wasn't carrying it around.
So you don't do a lot of gels?
Oh, never do gels unless I need a pick-me-up. So I usually keep an emergency gel in my pack if I realize I am about to bonk. I've never bonked, though, either. And then that's something for some quick sugar. But, yeah, it wreaks havoc on your stomach. And I think I'm lucky in that my digestive system generally does well. But I think what happens with some people, and this is me speculating, is here, for instance, I was eating literally every 15 minutes. So I think what happens is some people only eat about once an hour, and then they consume 200 or 300 calories all in one wad. And my theory, and I'm not a medical professional, is that too much blood has to go to their stomach, and then they start having cramps and stomach distress because they're consuming too much at one time. And I think that tends to snowball then, is now their stomach hurts, so they don't want to eat, and then blah, blah, blah. So I feel like I kind of consume calories like an IV. And I've noticed that when I do races, I'm eating, I guess I'm aware of when I eat, maybe someone's sneaking stuff, but I'm always amazed how it seems like people aren't eating as much as I am. And so it works for me, and it might not work for everyone, but that's my theory.
So was it like a PB&J or like a turkey with
turkey with cheese and just bread. So simple. And it was 46, so I didn't have to worry about keeping it too cold or hot. In the winter, I had one workout that I started when it was 12 degrees. So I had actually, and I got this tip from Tim when he did the winter triathlon, is I boiled water, put it in water jugs, and put it in my cooler so food wouldn't freeze or my liquids wouldn't freeze. And so I actually needed a cooler in the winter to keep things warm. And so here it was nice because I was like, oh, it's actually, I think when I finished, it was 1 degree above freezing. Now still, as soon as I stopped, my body, like within 5 minutes, my hands were numb. And Alex was there, he could testify.
I'm not standing around here any longer because I'm going to hold my steering wheel.
So once again,
Picked up your stuff, walked to the car, have a good night.
yeah, so that was also that was my first ever virtual challenge. And yeah, it was very anticlimactic in that, well, first of all, I wanted to make sure the requirement for Everesting has to upload to Strava and be official in Strava. So I'd done the hill enough times, but I was having Tim and Alex double check my math because I didn't want to be one short and then find out, oh. So I knew it was going to take a while to upload to Strava. I was thinking, and I'm like, I'm so close to the record, I can't stop and wait for it. So I have to start running down the hill. So I'm holding my phone, hoping I'm not going to fall going down the hill, but I'm thinking it's going to take 5 minutes for the upload, and that's when I'm going to be at the bottom of the hill. Luckily, it only took half that time. And I started yelling, and Alex is like, are you okay? And I'm like, it uploaded, I made it.
We're yelling in the woods, and it's really dark, and I'm running with the lantern down like the stairway to hell, and I'm like, are you okay? For sure you got hurt, but
yeah, so it did upload. My math was correct. The double checking the math was correct, and so it was official. Well, I had to wait for him to. Well, yeah. So I think you have to complete the lap though. Okay. So there's some specific rules for the Everesting attempt. It has to be on a Strava segment that is not a loop. It has to be an out and back essentially. I think, and a lot of people bike. It's kind of started bigger on the bike side, and that's how I had heard about it. So yeah, the pace actually was pretty steady. So yeah, that was it. So thanks for listening to me talk, and